Picture this. A modern human and a caveman are both dropped into the wilderness with nothing. No weapons, no shelter, no help. Who survives longer? Your first instinct is probably the caveman. He's tougher. He's used to this. He's basically built for it. And you can barely start a campfire without a lighter. But that instinct is wrong. Dead wrong. And by the end of this, you're going to understand why the modern human, even a soft, screen-addicted, never-been-camping modern human, actually has the long-term survival advantage. Not because we're physically stronger, we're not, but because we're carrying something the caveman never had access to. Thousands of years of compounded knowledge. Let's start by being honest about what a caveman actually knew. Hunting, tracking, reading animal behavior, making basic stone tools. That's it. That was the entire survival toolkit for over 90% of human history. And to be fair, those skills were incredibly refined. A skilled hunter-gatherer could read a broken twig or a shift in the wind and know exactly what kind of animal passed through hours earlier. But here's the problem with that skill set. It only works in the environment you grew up in. Anthropologists who study hunter-gatherer survival have pointed out something most people get wrong. A hunter-gatherer dropped into an unfamiliar ecosystem doesn't automatically know what to do. Their knowledge wasn't universal. It was hyper-local, passed down generation after generation, specific to the exact plants, animals, and seasons of their home territory. Take that same skilled hunter and drop him somewhere completely new and he's starting from zero, just like anyone else scrambling to figure out which plants are edible and which ones will kill him. That's the caveman's hidden weakness. His survival strategy was a gamble that reset every single day. Hunt successfully, eat, hunt unsuccessfully, starve. There was no stockpile, no backup plan, no insurance policy, just the next hunt and the one after that for an entire lifetime. Now let's talk about what the modern human is actually carrying around, even without realizing it. You know that food doesn't have to be hunted fresh every single day because somewhere in your brain is the basic concept of agriculture. Plant a seed, wait, harvest a crop, store it for winter. That single idea, agriculture, didn't exist for the caveman at all. It took our species over 100,000 years to figure that out. You already know it before you've even tried to survive. You know that meat can be preserved, salted, smoked, dried. The caveman ate what he caught when he caught it, because preservation methods like this took thousands of years of trial and error to develop. You already have the concept loaded in, even if you've never personally smoked a piece of meat in your life. You know that shelter doesn't have to be a cave you got lucky enough to find. You understand insulation. You understand that a structure with walls and a roof traps heat. You understand basic concepts like elevating a sleeping area off cold ground, channeling rainwater away from where you sleep, or building a windbreak. None of this requires you to be an engineer. It requires you to have grown up in a civilization that already solved these problems for you centuries ago and quietly handed you the answer key. You know which plants are generally safe based on basic patterns, simple identification logic that took human civilization millennia to compile into something you can now learn from a 5-minute video. The caveman had to learn this the hard way, sometimes literally by trial and poisoning. You understand basic chemistry, even if you don't think of it that way. You know that boiling water kills most things that will make you sick. The caveman had no concept of microorganisms. People drank from contaminated water sources for thousands of years without understanding why they kept getting sick. You already know not to. This is the part that should genuinely surprise you. Survival isn't really about raw toughness. It's about information. And modern humans are walking around with an almost unfair amount of preloaded information, even the ones who've never spent a single night outdoors. Think about modern survivalists, the kind you see building shelters and starting fires with nothing but sticks and patience. Notice what they're actually doing. They're not improvising blindly the way a caveman had to. They're applying centuries of accumulated knowledge about friction, airflow, insulation, and food safety, just using primitive tools to do it. That's the real difference. It was never about who has better muscles. It's about who has better information running in the background. Here's another piece most people overlook. The caveman lived in a world with no real medicine. A small infected cut could kill you. A broken bone could end your life slowly and painfully. Modern humans, even with zero supplies, carry basic medical knowledge in their heads. You know that a wound needs to be cleaned. You know that pressure stops bleeding. You know what a fever generally means. None of that requires a hospital. It just requires knowing what your ancestors spent thousands of years dying to figure out. Now, to be fair, there's one area where the caveman genuinely had the edge: raw physical conditioning. Their bodies were constantly active, constantly adapted to physical strain in a way most modern humans simply aren't. If this were a sprint, a 100-meter dash through the forest, the caveman probably wins. But survival isn't a sprint. It's a long, grinding test of decision-making under pressure. And that's exactly where accumulated knowledge wins over raw instinct. The caveman could outrun you. He could probably outhunt you in the short term. But over weeks, the gap closes fast because you know things he simply has no way of knowing, no matter how many years he spent in the wild. This is really the story of human civilization in miniature. We didn't get better at surviving because individual humans became stronger or faster. If anything, we became softer physically. We got better at surviving because knowledge stopped resetting to zero with every generation. The caveman had to relearn almost everything from scratch every single lifetime. You don't. You inherited tens of thousands of years of trial, error, and refinement, and you didn't even have to do the work. Let's talk about fire for a second, because it's the perfect example of this whole idea. The caveman could absolutely make fire. Friction, sparks, dry tinder. He knew the physical technique. But think about what you know that he didn't. You understand why a fire needs airflow to breathe. You understand that certain woods burn longer and hotter than others. You understand the basic concept of building a fire in stages: tinder, then kindling, then fuel wood, rather than just piling everything together and hoping. These aren't advanced concepts to you. They're common sense, absorbed from documentaries, school, or a 5-minute video you half watched once. To the caveman, every piece of that understanding had to be earned through generations of trial and error, with plenty of cold, smoky failures along the way. Now, think about tools. The caveman's most advanced piece of technology was a sharpened rock tied to a stick. It took early humans well over 1 million years to go from a simple hand axe to anything resembling a sophisticated weapon. You, on the other hand, intuitively understand leverage, basic physics, the difference between a blunt and bladed edge, and how a simple pulley or lever can multiply force. You probably learned most of this without ever trying to build a tool in your life. It's just baked into how you think, because it's baked into the world you grew up in. Here's something else worth considering: group knowledge versus individual knowledge. A single caveman, isolated and alone, was incredibly vulnerable. Hunter-gatherer survival depended heavily on the group: shared labor, shared food, shared protection. Take one person out of that group and drop them somewhere alone, and even their hard-won skills become a lot less effective without backup. A modern human, even alone, is still carrying an entire civilization's worth of knowledge in their head. You're never really isolated, even when you're physically alone, because everything you know was built collectively by millions of people across thousands of years. There's also the psychological piece, which almost nobody talks about. Modern humans tend to assume cavemen were fearless, hardened survivalists who never panicked. But fear and uncertainty in an unfamiliar situation isn't unique to modern people. A caveman facing an unfamiliar predator, an unfamiliar landscape, or a sudden injury would have felt exactly the kind of panic you'd feel. The difference is you have access to something that calms that panic down faster. a working knowledge of what's actually dangerous and what isn't. A garden snake probably isn't venomous. A loud noise from an animal is more often a warning than an attack. That kind of background knowledge doesn't just keep you alive, it keeps you calm enough to make good decisions instead of panicked ones. Let's go back to the disease question for a second, because this one is genuinely underrated. The caveman lived in a world where a simple infection could be a death sentence, and he had no idea why. He didn't know that bacteria existed. He didn't know that a wound needed to be kept clean, rather than wrapped in whatever was nearby. He didn't know that drinking from a stagnant pool downstream of a dead animal was a gamble with his life. These weren't failures of intelligence. He was just as smart as you are. He simply didn't have access to information that took human civilization thousands of years and millions of deaths to figure out. You, on the other hand, walk around with an invisible safety net built from all of that hard-earned knowledge. You know to avoid stagnant water. You know a wound needs pressure and cleaning, not just a leaf wrapped around it. You know that a fever is your body fighting something, not a curse or a punishment. None of this requires equipment. It requires only what's already sitting in your head, inherited for free from everyone who suffered through figuring it out the hard way so you wouldn't have to. This is really the quiet superpower of being a modern human. You don't have to rediscover fire. You don't have to rediscover which berries are poisonous. You don't have to rediscover that boiling water makes it safer to drink. Every single one of those lessons was paid for in someone else's mistakes, centuries before you were born, and handed to you for free, often without you even noticing you'd received it. So let's go back to the original question. Could a caveman win a foot race against you? Almost certainly. Could he outhunt you in his home environment within the first few hours? Probably. But survival was never actually about winning the first hour. It's about whether you're still alive and making good decisions a week later, a month later, a season later. And that's exactly where instinct runs out and knowledge takes over. So the next time you assume a caveman would obviously outlast you in the wild, remember this. He had stronger legs. He had sharper instincts for the one specific environment he grew up in. But you have something he never had access to, no matter how skilled he became. The accumulated knowledge of every human being who ever solved a survival problem before you were even born. You're not soft, you're loaded with information. And in the long run, that's the thing that actually keeps you alive.